Welcome to Tiger Drop Films, and if you're a returning viewer, then I sincerely thank you. I hope you enjoy this video either way. Today's video is going to be about a certain gigantic game in the series that came out recently, that being Yakuza 8, or Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth, and I recently finally got to finish playing this game, and suffice to say I had a tremendous and fantastic time playing it and enjoying myself. I had a sweetheart of a good time. But this also begs the question, did it really live up to the hype? Well, let's find out. Infinite Wealth is such a gigantic game. In fact, it's the only game in the series whose story is so gigantic that it spans the Pacific, with this being the first Yakuza game to take place in America, specifically the state Hawaii. And I do think that Hawaii was the right call. If you're going to take Yakuza to America, I think Hawaii was pretty much the only place you could take it. I'm going to break this video into 3 sections. The first being about Kiryu Kazuma, then Ichiban Kasuga, and lastly, ending it with the overall theme of this game, and my overall impression of what this theme and story was trying to tell. So, grab your Stamina X and your dragon binding, and let's get into this. Kiryu Kazuma is a legend, and he is absolutely a hero, and don't let anybody else tell you otherwise. I mean, this guy's changed the lives of so many people, from the game's main stories being these big action blockbusters of dramatic moments that bring us to tears, to the side content and sub-stories where we get to see Kiryu be an everyday hero, helping random people on his daily adventures. So when you take these 2 aspects into consideration, there's no doubt that if Kazuma Kiryu didn't do the things he did in these games, then there would be a lot of bad guys running amok. But thankfully, Kiryu was able to save the day, many times. And this brings us to Infinite Wealth, the so-called final game of Kiryu Kazuma, and one that really dives into his legacy more so than any other game before it. Or in other words, it really challenges Kiryu as he tries to reflect on his life, and he tries to move forward in enjoying life. But sadly, he developed cancer over the past couple of years, and it's kind of up to you if he got it from that nuclear facility he was working at with the Daidoji, or maybe he just sort of developed it from taking so much damage over the years and facing death so many times. But what this game really challenges Kiryu in is his desire to live. And I do think that the reason I mentioned why Kiryu is absolutely a hero is because in this game he really doesn't think that of himself. He's very hard on himself. Not only is he trying not to embrace being the Dragon of Dojima, but he's also running from all the people he's helped. He's a bit ashamed to just embrace all the good he's done in his life. That's because Kiryu is such a humble and sincere man that he doesn't really have gratitude for himself. But I do love how this game really explored the impact that Kiryu's had on people, and he's still having on people, such as with Shizuko, a sub-story character from 6 who appears in Infinite Wealth, and we see her after she went through her surgery in 6, where Kiryu dressed up as Unomichio to give her courage. I'm glad she was a mandatory sub-story to show somebody Kiryu has saved. Another example is Ichiban's party, and every side character really looking up to him. Even if you just take into consideration Ichiban Kasuga's reaction to seeing Kiryu in Hawaii for the first time, it's priceless, it's great stuff. And even when Kiryu runs into Yamai during his Adventures of Ichiban, turns out Yamai knows of the legend of the Dragon of Dojima, so he knows of Kiryu in some way. And I think that's pretty important for the overall game story, about trying to deal with your own fate. And that brings me into the bucket list. Kiryu's specific side content for him in this game though was hyped pretty well, and the marketing leading up to this game, so much so that there was even a bucket list trailer, where we got a little glimpse of the adventures we get to go on as Kiryu and reuniting with these old faces. Now, the bucket list was kind of broken into 3 sections. One was the life links, which are a very big highlight, where we get to see characters we have not seen in years come back. Then we have the sort of sub-stories for Kiryu, where he gets to meet some other minor sub-story characters from throughout the years, but they're still pretty notable, there's no doubt about that. And some of these sub-stories tie into the Memoirs of a Dragon, where Kiryu gets to go throughout the map with a little glowing spot and reminisce about something that from past games, or something that reminds him of something from past games. For instance, Yokohama, we've never been there as Kiryu himself, besides a little bit in Gaiden, but that means he really didn't have any adventures here. But different places like the rivers, or some of the shops will remind him of other characters from throughout the years, if you know what I mean. But that also shows us how Kiryu, as he's supposedly facing down his last days due to cancer, and just really, at this point he's been stuck with the Daidoji for almost a decade. You can really see how it's just beneficial for him to remember these events, these moments, these characters that have some meaning to him in some way. And I think that's kind of an important sort of way that it ties to the story itself. As you can see, the developers brought back the classic tech, soul, and body upgrade components from past games, including 3 of his fighting styles from Zero, and they also appeared in Like a Dragon 7. And I think that the fact that we get to be Kiryu once again, and try to battle cancer in the form of remembering and bringing life back into Kiryu himself. That's the big point I want to highlight, bringing back life into Kiryu himself. I even had a commenter comment on my Comparing the Dragons of Yakuza video, where they brought some great information to me, kind of stating how if you translate Kiryu's name in Chinese in a certain way, his name essentially means life. And when you look at Yakuza 6, the Song of Life, it all just kind of ties together. And that's what I really like about this bucket list. We get to be Kiryu and remember all these old events. Because when you're facing down your last days of a condition, a disease that most likely could be fatal, it's important to remember the people that have impacted you, and vice versa, the people that you have impacted, because that might just give you enough willpower to make it. I think that's what's important here in the story. Kiryu's remembering these events and becoming stronger because of it, and finding a new desire to live. As you can see in the life links, we get our homie Date comes back to beckon Kiryu to meet these people from his life that he sets him up with. For instance, we get to see Taichi, Yuya and Kazuki, Takeshira and Mutsunaga from 6, Nakajima from Yakuza 5, Sayama from Yakuza 2, and of course Akiyama. And what's really awesome here is that Akiyama straight up just punches Kiryu and Date. We got to see Akiyama use his fist. How about that? And then the life links culminate in Date getting jumped by the Daidoji because he's helping Kiryu when he's supposed to be quote-unquote dead. And it's kind of a very bittersweet ending. But after this, where he saves Date, we get a nice scene at that Yokohama bar. And what I find very important about this final lifelink scene is this. We see Date stop Kiryu as he's about to leave. He's like, Kiryu, you have to live. You've inspired and impacted so many people in your life. Can you imagine what these people and others would think if they heard that the Dragon of Dojima faced death head on and lived? As he's referring to the cancer. And I think that's what really sold these lifelinks for me. That, well, sure, I just wish Kiryu would have just dove in and spoke to, Sayama and Yuya and Kazuki and everyone else. I do think it's pretty significant that Date gave Kiryu this speech, because Date is his best friend. He even says it out loud. And while this may have been a very bittersweet ending to the life links, I think it was important because it highlighted something that we all knew. And it's this, okay? This, when talking about the hype leading up to this game. Was Kiryu going to die? No, I do not think they would have let him die. And this kind of brings me to a point said by Sylvester Stallone himself regarding a certain character of his that I don't want to spoil if you haven't seen it. But Stallone said that people, they don't need to see their hero die. Life is already hard enough as is, and I'm kind of paraphrasing here. But he essentially says that if people know that their hero made it, then that's going to help them make it throughout their life. I think that applies to Kiryu and Infinite Wealth. Sure, that marketing and the lifelink hype kind of and the cancer kind of set it up that he was going to die. And that does linger over the plot. It's very a somber feeling for otherwise game that is bright and vibrant and energetic. But I think these lifelinks highlight that Kiryu had a renowned sense of wanting to live, and we even get hints of this in the lifelinks. While Kiryu's a guy that's going to stick to his quote-unquote mission of staying dead, you know that the things these characters said truly meant something to him. He just kept his usual stoic demeanor and tried to hide it, but Date himself knew it was making progress. We even get this same bit from Akiyama, where Akiyama himself spills the beans to Kiryu how much Kiryu has impacted him, because we all know that in Yakuza 4 it's revealed that the events of Yakuza 1 gave Akiyama his new life that would lead him to being a moneylender, the lifeline of Kamurocho, and I'm glad that Akiyama reminded Kiryu of this. It was very important in my eyes. And with that in mind, we get Yuya, who flat out says that he's got a bottle of liquor, a very special bottle that he's kept safe, and he's been waiting to use it for the day Kiryu comes back. Because we all know that all these characters in the lifelinks, they know that Kiryu's still out there. They just know it. The guys, he's one tough son of a bitch. No way he truly died during Yakuza 6. Even every character knows that. And as I said, Yuya's got that special bottle of liquor waiting for Kiryu's return. Nakajima, even though he only knew him as Taichi Suzuki, he kept his door open for the day Kiryu would come back, and even Date kind of slips to Nakajima that Kiryu's still out there. It's very subtle. And we got Sayama. We get to see her look at her left hand, and it's clear she does not have a ring on her finger. No marriage. And I like that. It leaves the door open for Kiryu to come back and finally marry her. It shows the connection those two truly had. I mean, if you make out before a bomb's about to go off, you gotta be pretty close. Know what I'm saying? And I was really happy that they included that. Yuya and Sayama both hinting that they know Kiryu's out there and that they're leaving something for him to come back and finish. Whether it's that bottle of liquor with Yuya and Kazuki, or coming back and putting a ring on Sayama's hand. I think it's really poetic to have these characters from his legacy, his earliest days, know he's still out there. And with that in mind, we get to the last life link, where Akiyama's back in the fold and he gets Haruka and Haruto to come to a new Serena, Kamurocho, and Date tries to get Kiryu to go meet her. And at this moment you just knew, because they do not show Haruka's face or Haruto's face. You just know they're setting up something for the main story. And it should be noted that you kind of have to complete these life links before you finish the campaign. And I do think it pays off. So this brings me to the finale. And we get to finally see Kiryu have a good old fist fight alongside his bros, the three Jimas. Daigo, his son in a way. Majima, the guy who's been in it with him since Yakuza 0. Even though they didn't meet during the main course of that game, they both were involved in the same Yakuza conspiracy. And we get Saejima, who is a very powerful man who has just as much wealth of knowledge and just wisdom and tranquility that Kiryu himself does. So we got the three Jimas and our Dragon of Dojima himself, all four of them teaming up to take on these Omi guys that have been around since Gaiden. It's such a great fight. It's so hype. The track that plays called The Four is immeasurable, and the joy it brings me seeing these four team up. The choreography is awesome. We get to see Kiryu's party go on the bench as the Tojo boys help Kiryu take down all these Omi Seiryu clan grunts, and it's amazing. Definitely a highlight of the game. And something that Yakuza 6 didn't give us, and I'm happy we got it here. And it's even better when you consider Gaiden gave us the very same scene, except that one they got to tear off their suits and show off their Irazumis. So I can appreciate both Gaiden's fan service with the Tojo boys and Infinite Wealth's fan service with these Tojo boys. It's brilliant. So we get this Final Millennium Tower, where these classic legends return to help Kiryu. We get a new remix of Receive You that includes the Latin verses from the original version, and we even get the helicopter from Yakuza 6, another helicopter, oh my god. But then it culminates in Kiryu fighting Abina. where he is able to defeat this Oni, this ogre, and he's able to put to rest the sins of the Yakuza of the past. And this brings us to the end credit scene. Now, let me put it this way. Going into this game with the hype in mind, I was really hoping they would give Kiryu a happy ending, because I had a feeling they just wouldn't kill him. And then I was really hoping he would finally get to reunite with Haruka and Haruto. Now, did the game deliver on that? Let me explain. Yes and no. The ending we got is, in a way, satisfying. I'll just put it bluntly, I was happy with the ending. Sure, it felt kinda sweet on Kiryu's end, it felt kinda short and sweet. I had to remind myself that a game like Yakuza 5 and 2, those are my favorites of the franchise, and they both have endings that just kind of end. And sure, they have post-credit scenes, but when you consider how Yakuza 5 ends with Kiryu just bleeding out in the cold, but he finally got the reunite of Haruka, that's very bittersweet. And it just kind of ends there, but it's powerful. Now, does Infinite Wealth live up to that kind of ending? Not quite. But it still gave me what I wanted, I just didn't get to see it. And what I mean is that we get to see Haruka and Haruto visit Kiryu in the hospital, but he's going through chemo, so by the time they get there, they come across an empty room that just says the name Kiryu Kazuma. And we get to see Haruka's reaction that she knows she's gonna see him, and I think that just kind of shows their bond, for it's been years. And although, as we see in the life link, Haruka herself was she really didn't know what to think about the potential of Kiryu coming back, because they've been so used to him being gone for so long. But of course, she was gonna show up because that's her father, and we even get to see Haruto mention that he knows Kiryu's his grandpa, and that just tugs at my heartstrings. But I do think it's a very Yakuza ending to have Haruka look off and see that Kiryu has finally got his name back on the hospital bed, on the patient sheet. And then it cuts to Kiryu going through chemo, where we don't see his face, but we see from his hands and feet that he's lost a lot of weight, even more from the main game. And we get the doctor who asked Kiryu, "What's your name, sir?" And we get an ending that is so Yakuza, but it goes so damn hard. We get Kiryu sitting in a wheelchair, looking at the screen, says, "Kiryu Kazuma." And then it cuts to black and it says Finn. But it should be noted that during this section, we get another cut back to Haruka looking off in the distance. So, in a way, we did get to see them reunite. Well, we know they're going to reunite after this scene. And we know that Kiryu's going to pull through. So, while I didn't get that heart-wrenching, gut-punching reunion between Haruka and Kiryu, something that I really wanted to see, it's not like the game didn't leave it open, no. In fact, Haruka's, well, she's in the same hospital that Kiryu's in, and when he's done with that treatment, she'll be able to reunite with him properly. And so, while I wish we would have got that reunion on screen, part of me is a bit satisfied as I played through this game and Kiryu's journey over, 10 mainline games, including Gaiden and Zero. It was satisfying for me to know that he got his name back. And not only that, he gets to reunite with Haruka. And yeah, I still wish I could have got to see it on screen, especially him getting to see Haruto too, but as it stands, RGG left the door open for him to truly reunite with them fully. And if you play these games over a span of a couple of years, and it's kind of interesting to consider that Gaiden gave me that ending that made me shed tears. So I think it was kind of a given that Infinite Wealth was hopefully going to give a more of a happy ending, and it did give that in a way. I just do wish the ending itself, the epilogue, was longer. Yakuza 6 takes place in 2016, and Infinite Wealth takes place in 2023. That's a whole 7 years of Kiryu being quote-unquote dead from his family. But I do like that if you consider the whole, how it was almost a decade of him being gone, in a way I can kind of see from a writer's perspective why they didn't really want to directly show the reunion, but show that the door is wide open and you know they're going to reunite. But with that being said, those are my thoughts on Kiryu Kazuma's story in this game, and I'll tie back into it more with the last section. But for now, let's dive into Ichiban Kasuga, the Dragon of Rock Bottom. I really adored the endearing Ichiban Kasuga in this game, especially the first half that really does feel like a proper sequel to Yakuza 7, much like how Yakuza 2 really built off of what was laid out in Yakuza 1. For instance, we get to see Ichiban at Hello Work trying to pick up from the Great Dissolution, and we get to see he really is trying to pick up from what his father, Arakawa, was trying to do, or wanted to do if he was not taken away by Tendo. And that is trying to help rehabilitate the Yakuza, the thousands of countless Yakuza that were left in the dust and wake of 7 and Gaiden's events. And I really like that setup. It feels like the right place to go for a sequel. We even get to see Adachi, Namba, and Saiko with new jobs and going about their lives too with new looks and drip to boot. And I really like how the game kind of shows Ichiban struggling with dating and adult life, and as he's trying to ask Saiko out on a date that goes pretty well until he asks her for marriage. It's kind of a goofy premise, but I do like that. It shows Ichiban trying to go about dating an adult life, and especially as a dragon fish, so to speak, out of water. Because you gotta remember, he was in prison for longer than any other Yakuza character, unless you count Saijuma's extra years in prison, but you know Saijima went to prison many times to get that free pizza. But so Ichiban, he's a dragon fish out of water, and he tries to ask Saiko to marriage, and of course, as you expect, it doesn't go well, and you can see why. But I like how that we get this bit of Ichiban trying to make it in life following the events of Yakuza 7, and then we flash forward a year, where we get to see Ichiban whip out the Eric Andre hair and the hero bat, and he teams up again with Adachi and Namba as they're contacted by the Seiyu clan, and we get our first reunion with Sawashiro and our first look at Abina. And what I like here that we get a little bit of trip down memory lane of mechanics, and here I'll talk a little bit about the gameplay. I love the gameplay in this game. Wow, how many times can I say game? But I love how they built off of what is laid out in Yakuza 7. And while I really enjoyed Yakuza 7's turn-based combat, I mean really, it's like the first turn-based game I loved. And that's because they took things from adult life and married it with mechanics of Yakuza and blended it into a JRPG or JRPG experience I loved. I mean, you get to have goofy jobs like being a homeless guy or being a dominatrix, all kinds of goofy jobs that are even more expanded upon with the new Hawaiian jobs in this game that I loved. I love the inclusion of pyro dancer, geo dancer, and then we get American jobs like linebacker and tennis ace. And there's so many wonderful jobs, even more I didn't even get the list, that I really think highlight how strong this gameplay is. And now characters attack, they do chain combos even more than the last game. And there's the infinite power-ups that are tag teams that are wonderful. There's so much you go into, but the gameplay, it feels expansive. There's even more depth to it. And goddamn was it challenging at times. If Majima and Saijima were the roadblocks in Yakuza 7, then in Infinite Wealth it was the giant fucking squid. I mean, god, man, that giant squid was a nightmare. Besides that, the gameplay did feel harder, but I didn't mind that. It was a good challenge, and there were so many enemies. What I love about this turn-based combat is not only the variety you get, as playing as characters and changing their jobs and really getting to know them, their unique jobs, and how they bounce off each other with their own charisma. I loved how there was even a greater variety of degenerates and madmen and freaks and monsters and horrible guys you gotta beat the crap out of in the form of enemy variety. And we get the Sujimons that are even more expansive this time around. And so I really liked how much the gameplay felt expanded, and I enjoyed the depth to it. It really did feel infinite in a sort of way. But there's a caveat to that. The Yakuza games are no stranger to making you do the expansive side content during the story, at least getting introduced to it. For instance, Gaiden made you do the Akame network for a little bit, or the Colosseum, just to progress through the story, at least get exposed to it. And Yakuza 7 had business, then they made you go through dungeons. Yakuza 5 was another game that did that, and Yakuza 0. But I felt like Yakuza 5 and 0 did a much better job of making it feel organic to the plot, and not like they were grabbing your hand and making you play the side content. And what I mean is I was a little annoyed at Infinite Wealth for making me kind of slog through the opening hours of Sujimon and Dodonko Island. Now don't get me wrong, the Sujimancer and Dodonko Island massive side game modes are a lot of fun, and I was happy to test them out. But man, I really felt like I kind of got stuck doing that side content for a while. I mean, especially Dodonko Island, they make you stay there in the game for a few days. You know, of course not in real life hours, but like in the game, you have to stay on the island for like quite a bit before you can just get back to the main story. And there was some other side content in the game as well, like Crazy Taxi, which that was a bit more fun to do on a first impression. But with, that in mind, Sujimon, Dodonko Island, and Crazy Taxi, it really did feel like the game was kind of grabbing your hand and making you like, hey, try out the stuff that we got to do in Hawaii. Don't you want to see our Hawaii collaboration and tourism? And that's all fine. Again, it's fine. Yakuza is a series known for virtual tourism, and I don't blame them for wanting to capitalize on being in Hawaii, being in America this time, to show off this expansive game content, because there's nothing wrong with having a bunch of content. I welcome it. I do feel like it hurt the pacing of the story, especially those first 7 chapters, that make you do this other side content. Because as Ichiban, it fits him. This new content fits him in his zany schizophrenia. I just feel like it hurt the pacing of the story more. Whereas when you get to play as Kiryu, I felt a greater incentive to do the bucket list and go down memory lane as the Dragon of Dojima. So I do feel like there's that kind of disparity, that kind of not the good kind of juxtaposition in that side content, how they brought it to you. Because I would have felt more enjoyment just running into Dodonko Island or Sujimon while I'm exploring the world in Hawaii. I feel like that would have been more fun instead of just, making me feel like the story that I was invested in was slowing down, because I didn't even really do any of Ichiban's side sub-stories. I just wanted to do the main campaign. When it comes to Ichiban himself, I do think this is a very good sequel for him. By that I mean, once you get past the whole Yokohama part in this game and he's in Hawaii, as he's looking for his birth mother, I thought that was a very endearing storyline for him. There's a bunch of callbacks to 7, or should I say, it builds off the themes laid out in 7 that fit Ichiban as a character, as in we get to see him commune and interact with Eiji, who turns out to be a cool guy at first. Then we get that plot twist that I did not see coming, where he was a plant by Abina to capitalize on Ichiban's brotherhood with Masato Arakawa, or Ryo Aoki. It's kind of salt in the wound for Ichiban, because he didn't get to fully save Masato Arakawa before Kume swept in and stabbed him. But I do think it was interesting to have a character with such a direct homage, or supposed to make us think about Masato Arakawa, because man, that ending of 7 was heartbreaking, and it really tugged at the heartstrings here. And then we get to Ichiban wanting to reunite with his birth mother, because of course there's the big classic Yakuza conspiracy going about, and we even get to see his mother Akane and the kid Lanny, who was kind of a Haruka homage. And there's a lot of good things in this game that kind of built off previous plot points we'd see in previous entries. It tugged at the heartstrings, man, just to see Ichiban truly reunite with his mother. And the scene where he's talking to Akane on the beach, they're just catching up, and it's a bit awkward. And you can see why it's awkward, because he's never seen his mother, and he's like in his mid-40s. And it was awkward for Akane too, seeing her child just all grown up. And man, it tugged at my heartstrings when Ichiban gave her old man Arakawa's ashes and that necklace. And then she said that he looks like Arakawa. I'm like, oh man, that was just heartbreaking, with the sunset behind them and the beach. This tropical summertime setting that was juxtaposed against a very heartbreaking scene. But of course, I'm glad that there was a happy ending for Ichiban and his mother. I'm really glad. And that brings us to the central conflict of Ichiban battling Bryce, Fairchild, who was his final boss in this game. And I guess Bryce is supposed to represent another sort of JRPG figure. Like if Tendo was Dragon in the last game, then I guess from what I've heard from a few people, Bryce is like the evil lord, and I guess that kind of fits him being a cultist leader. But I'm glad that Bryce was Ichiban's final fight. I think it makes sense. You gotta capitalize on a Hawaiian setting, and why not have the Hawaiian cult guy who has the nuclear waste island and he commands sea creatures that probably grew from that nuclear waste? It makes sense to me. And if Ichiban's the kind of guy that is positive and leads by example, and he's just so down to earth. I mean, what this game did was, in Yakuza 7, we see him get through to Namba and Psycho, and their two pivotal scenes they each had, where Ichiban, we see what kind of man he really is. He's heroic, he's passionate, and he's human. And we get that infinite wealth. He gets through to Tomizawa, and then he gets through to Chitose, where he takes both of them in, even though they all kind of started off on the wrong foot. He trusts them, he's human, and he's passionate and sincere. That's what I love about Ichiban. So I was happy that Infinite Wealth brought back that part of him. He was able to break through to people and bring them into his party. I mean, this is a guy that became buddies with Jungi Han, Zhao, and Sun-hee. Figures that are symbolic of Yokohama's underground, you know? People are supposed to be vicious and they're drippy as hell. But Ichiban got through to him. So I'm happy this game got to see that with Tomizawa and Chitose too. And that's why I think it was poetic to have Bryce be Ichiban's final boss in this game. Sure, I wish that he maybe somehow had some kind of tattoo, some kind of Irozumi just to tie in that Yakuza goodness. But if Arakawa was the main final boss of the last game and he did not have an Irozumi, then I guess it makes sense for Bryce not to have one. You know what I mean? But Bryce was this figure that controlled this entire, all of Honolulu. He was the overseer, and he was trying to control all the leaders of the world just by having something to blackmail them with, that is, the nuclear waste. So he controls people with religion and influence and fear. I mean, if you look at the way Danny Trejo's character, I mean, I played it in Japanese, but the guy he reminds me of Danny Trejo of the Machetes. Dwight. If you look at how Dwight and Wong too, who was like the most underutilized character in the game, look at how those two react in utter fear at the overseer, at Bryce Fairchild's presence and his influence. Then I think it makes sense to have Ichiban, a guy who's so heroic and down to earth, the friend to everyone. I think there's that good dichotomy between the friend to everyone versus the guy who uses fear, the ruler of everyone. So yeah, I think Bryce was a very good final fight for Ichiban. And I do think the game challenged Ichiban in a great way. And that brings me to Eiji in the finale. Before the end credits roll, we get to see Ichiban finally make amends for what he couldn't do in saving Arakawa, Ryo Aoki. And this time he got to save Eiji, and he got to pick him up and take him to the police station, which is what he was supposed to do with Ryo Aoki, but he didn't get to. So I really like that Ichiban, as a sequel to 7, he really got to finally do what he couldn't do, and that is saving someone. And that brings me to the third section of this video. Did it live up to the hype as a whole, and what were the central themes of this plot, this narrative in this game? Well, let's get into it. We see Ichiban carry the injured Eiji to the police station in Kamurocho. Despite all the cancel culture going around him and the cancel culture that Eiji himself supervised. And I think that Ichiban having his heart big enough to forgive Eiji was beautiful. I was kind of abrasive to it at first, but as I thought about it over the past couple of days, it started to make sense for me when you consider the central theme of this game. And I believe that theme is forgiveness. Ichiban's able to forgive Eiji and help him get back on his feet in a way. Even if that means the mobs of crazy people on the internet and in person were hating on them. And then we see Ichiban save Bryce from killing himself, which I thought was pretty powerful. The hero got to stop the villain from taking the easy route. And while there was no forgiveness whatsoever given to Bryce, because there should not have been, and I'm glad they didn't, I'm glad he saved him because he got to suffer his consequences of his actions. He got to face all he's been doing the past, I don't know how many immortal years that guy's been alive. Especially when you consider that the game opens on Bryce ordering the killing of Lanny's grandparents. So I'm glad Ichiban truly got to stop Bryce. And then we get that scene that is just so emblematic of what Like a Dragon can be in an emotional way. That scene where Yamai comes back to Japan and he's about to kill the matriarch of his old clan. But then he just sees that she's struck with dementia and doesn't even recognize them. And we see this powerful scene of Yamai, who decides not to enact some kind of revenge or justice, and instead he just forgives her, and maybe he forgives himself too. He takes off that overcoat he's been wearing throughout the whole game, and he puts it on her because she was cold. And she thanks him. And I think that sort of thank you was all he needed to get over his pain. And as he takes those steps out of the room and down the hallway, we see that he was not cold anymore. And I thought that was just such a beautiful scene of forgiveness that I did not expect to see coming. And then we get to see Kiryu himself, who goes to Daigo, Saejima, and Majima and gets them out of their little sheltered cave life as fishermen. He tells them to get back on their feet, in a sense. He has to beat it into them. And I kind of like that. Those three GMOs are able to forgive themselves for not able to keep the security company afloat due to cancel culture. And because of that, they're able to come back in the finale and do what's right. Stand up and make sure the Yakuza are handled well, picking up what they did in the last game as well. That's another part I thought was a pretty good sequel element. Then we get Chitose, who, in the scene where they defeat Bryce, she reveals to the internet and the world that she was that VTuber persona. And I like that scene. I thought it was important that she was able to try to make amends by taking that first step. That hopefully all the Yakuza and other criminals that she's hurt, even her family in a way, that they're all able to forgive her because she's taken those first steps. And I thought that was very powerful and a good way to end her character. And we even get a little bit of that of Tomizawa, who is trying to make up for the sins of his past, because Bryce was the reason he lost his newborn child through a miscarriage, and he lost his wife, who doesn't even know where she's at. And Eric, he's able to not kill Dwight. He's able to forgive Dwight. Well, maybe not outright forgive, but be the better man, which I think is just as important. So we get to see a little bit of that of Tomizawa and Chitose as well. And then we get to Kiryu himself, who he's fighting Abina to try to atone for the sins of his past. And we all know Kiryu is a hero. There's no doubt about that. But I can see why for Kiryu himself, much like how at the end of Yakuza 1 he was about ready to end it all if it was not for Date and Haruka. And keeping in mind that Kiryu's had almost a decade of living as Taichi Suzuki or Joryu, I can see why Kiryu's been so beat up over himself, especially with cancer trying to take him away. You can see why he really hasn't thought about his life. That's why the bucket list was so important. I mean, Kiryu didn't even know what his favorite food was at first. You know what I mean? He really had to truly think about who he was as a person, and I like that. And that's why we come to the finale, where Kiryu fights Abina. I mean, the final track is called The End of Denial. And I think that was pretty significant, as Kiryu was no longer denying who he was. He is Kiryu Kazuma, and he's gonna put Abina back in his place. And a little side note, Abina is played by Randa Yaguchi's actor from Shin Godzilla, which is just insane for me. Kiryu beat up a guy from Shin Godzilla that came out the same year Yakuza 6 came out. It's crazy how small the world is, huh? But anyway, the Dragon of Dojima, he's able to defeat this ogre, this Oni with 3 eyes, and he's red, he's got a knife on his mouth and a snake around him. He's able to defeat this figure that was created out of the sins and pain of the Yakuza's long history. And yeah, he is Ichiban's half-brother, but that doesn't really mean anything to Ichiban himself. And for Kiryu, I think it's kind of cool he's fighting this evil, dark, twisted version of Ichiban himself. What better way to continue passing the torch in the franchise than to have Kiryu fight the evil version of the franchise's successor? So I think it fits in that sense. And Abina is also the kind of guy that burnt down the Tojo clan. I mean, if you look at Kiryu's reaction on his phone to seeing the Tojo clan, it's kind of, he doesn't know what to think. He just says, and just like that, it's all gone. It's all burnt down. The Tojo clan HQ. So that was pretty interesting to have Abina be this guy who was trying to burn the Yakuza and let them also die a slow death to nuclear waste on Nele Island. So I think it's kind of interesting Abina's trying to just burn it all down, but yet, just like how Iwami was wanting to be a Yakuza because he was stuck as a civilian and yet he got an Irizumi, it's unique how Abina hates the Yakuza. He has a background in the police too. He hates them for taking away his mother. And yet, he still gets an Irizumi on his back. Maybe it's kind of like how Tendo was not a Yakuza until he cheated as a boxer. Then he got into the crime life. And then he got that Dragon Irizumi. Well, I think that kind of applies to Abina. In Abina's case, he hates the Yakuza. But he probably felt some kind of pride in taking this demonic-looking Oni as his Irizumi. He probably thought he was truly a figure bringing down wrath to the Yakuza and all their sins. And this spirals into Kiryu defeating Abina with all his strength. And he's able to just pummel him. And it actually ends in Kiryu being in tears as he's beckoning Abina, this embodiment of all the Yakuza's pain. He's begging Abina to forgive him. I think the scene kind of goes two ways. One, yeah, he is talking to Abina directly. He's trying to get to him to make him forgive his hate and not continue his rampage after the events of this game. But I took this as Kiryu's also talking to himself and everyone in his life, even if they're not right there. I felt like in this scene, Kiryu was talking to Shintaro Kazuma, he was talking to Yumi, he was talking to Nishiki, he was talking to everyone that means something to him, that he's lost for so long. He was calling out to them in a sort of way, trying to make them forgive him. And I know, we all know that they do not hold anything against him, of course. But for Kiryu himself living this long past their deaths, you can see why he felt this hardship, all this pain building up, and he felt like he had to just exclaim that he's sorry, and then he collapses from exhaustion from this tremendous long battle and probably the cancer too. That's what I took this scene as. That's what ties Infinite Wealth into not only finding out what the, Infinite Wealth is to you, but it was a game about the past and the future colliding and finding some kind of forgiveness. Because we can have the past hanker down and hinder us all we want. We're only able to move into the future if we find some kind of forgiveness in ourselves and others. That's what I think Infinite Wealth's main narrative was about. If I just had to sum it up in some way, because this is a gigantic game, and there are other themes at play. But at the end of the day, Infinite Wealth is a gigantic game. It had it probably had an infinite amount of hype going into it, as I did myself going to this game. And I gotta say, there are some things I wish were elaborated on more, or some scenes and character interactions that had some chance to shine, such as Ichiban meeting with Sarashiro again during the end of the game, or we got to see Ichiban and Kiryu have one more moment together. I really wanted that. And of course, I really wanted Kiryu to meet with Haruka on screen, but at least they left that door open. With all that in mind, I still wanted there to be a scene with every character together, because I really wanted to know what was the fate of the Seiryu clan or Palakana. Maybe one more scene of Ichiban and his mother. There's so many scenes I think they could have had in this game, but I do think the size of this game and the content, in a way, was a bit of a detriment to the pacing and just how much of the story we should have seen. But with that in mind, there's still so many brilliant moments in this game. Ones that I've already talked ad nauseum and I've talked your guys' ears off in this video. So many brilliant scenes in this game. The fan service is wonderful, and it's able to be a great send-off to Kiryu in ways that Yakuza 6 didn't really get to be, and that's coming from a guy who loves Yakuza 6. But even Yakuza 6 left the door open for Kiryu to return in the ending, as great as an ending as it was for him. It felt like there was another story to be told. And I do think that for all the shortfalls of Gaiden and some of Infinite Wealth, I do think it was a pretty satisfying journey to play as Kiryu in Infinite Wealth. And as a guy who's fell in love with this series, this is my favorite franchise ever since I got into it during the pandemic. Man, that was 4 years ago, what the heck? But I do think Infinite Wealth truly was satisfying, and I mean that. There's so many wonderful moments. I need more fingers to count how many wonderful moments there were in this game. Scenes that were passionate, heartwarming, and they had that like a dragon essence of storytelling beauty that I love. These games are more so about character moments and emotional character journeys than they are about plots that are supposed to really, make sense. I do think that when it comes to the themes of this franchise, the kick-ass soundtracks, the character work, the choreography, and the action, the set pieces, the content and side content, and what this game really represents as Ichiban's sequel, and the culmination of Kiryu's journey from 0, 1, 2, 3 until now. I do think this was a satisfying game that, for me at least, did live up to the hype. And I'm sure for a lot of people, content-wise, there's no doubt this game satisfied what you would want from a Like a Dragon game. Story-wise, I do wish there were some things they kind of did a little better. And that's only because the game had it open for them to elaborate on these story moments. But, that being said, for me, Tiger Drop Films, I had a hell of a time playing this game. And as I've gotten older and life's become even more busier for me and time keeps on ticking on, and I'm just trying to hold on to it, I do think that Infinite Wealth was really emblematic and symbolic of how much time has passed. But it was truly a journey that I loved, and I'm gonna miss Kiryu. I do think we might see him in a future game in some way, but when it comes to being able to play as him, I love this game. And I love Ichiban. I love Like a Dragon, man. You've seen this. Like a Dragon's like 75% of what this YouTube channel of mine is about. So I gotta say, Infinite Wealth, Yakuza 8, Like a Dragon as a whole, I love this game. It may not be in my favorites of the series, but I still really appreciate this game, and I was satisfied. And I do think the future for Like a Dragon is looking bright. And I'm happy that I got to experience another journey of Kiryu, Kazuma, and Ichiban, Kasuga. And I think Infinite Wealth, if I had to end the video on one thing, it would be this. Stories do come to an end, and characters do meet their fates, but ultimately life keeps going on. When the credits roll to something, there's other stories to be told, and some that we do not need to see. And I think the ending of Infinite Wealth shows that. We know that Kiryu finally got to have his name back and reunite with Haruka and Haruto, and I am sure that he got to go back and meet all the characters from his Life Link's stories, his bucket list. And we know that Ichiban is going to keep doing his thing and rising up despite all odds, and he's got a great group of friends behind him. So, Infinite Wealth is a story, another chapter in Yakuza. It may be the ending for some characters, but life keeps going on, and I know there's a lot of cool things to expect from this series going forward. Just like there is in our lives, we gotta keep going on, even past the great moments and the sad moments. We gotta keep going on into the future, and to find our own Infinite Wealth. Bit of a goofy ending on my end there for this video, but I hope you guys enjoyed my little rambling thoughts on Infinite Wealth. This video had to be big because this was a big game. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and please like and subscribe and let me know if Infinite Wealth lived up to the hype to you in the comments below. I've been Tiger Drop Films, and I'm signing out. I'll see you in the next one. Stay tuned.